Hi guys, good time of the day to you. I'm Liana Antonovich. My channel is about equestrian training strategies. Subscribe to my channel using the button below and share it. Please confirm if you agree with what I'm saying and leave your comments if you also disagree. Let's keep this conversation going. There are two training planning concepts. The first one is relational, agile, with focus on tactics. Another one is structural, waterfall, with focus on planning ahead, includes both strategies and tactics. Relational approach is popular in mass equestrian sport, especially in hobby riding and in companionships. Some sport concepts are relational in essence, like the dressage pyramid of training is a good example of a relational concept. Relational approach is more popular in North America with its Hollywood-like, fast-paced culture. Relational approach is adopted more successfully, naturally by female equestrians, as it is a natural gender fit. Structural approach, consciously or subconsciously. It is a part of professional equestrian world, and it is less frequent. It's rather rarely seen in masses. Some structure is added by the competition systems, of course, logistically, for example, following the schedule of events. Structural approach to training is more popular in Europe with its thorough, deliberate, process-oriented culture. Asians, by the way, are picking up the structural approach also very well. They are patient and very methodical. Structural approach is adopted more successfully by male equestrians, as it involves more logical action rather than feeling, sensing, although tact équestre, which is in translation from French, the feeling of a horse. They also may possess the feeling of a horse, tact équestre, in equally sheer amounts, just like female riders. In reality, both approaches effectively coexist, with relational approach dominating our minds. Today, we will bring to light the structural concept to training plan creation for a sport horse. In the North America, female riders are the majority of all equestrians. And since women traditionally lack structural thinking by design, my hopes are that we can bring it to our attention and begin using it to our own joy and to advantage of our horses. Do you think we will be touching the riding tactics like achieving collection or automatic release? This is not the subject of this video, but bear with me. The sport horse training defines and manages. We're talking here about the structural things. Needed activity, volume in a lifespan across career stages. We're talking about a horse life span and horse career stages. The next element is workloads in a mix, which is followed by daily activity stack, weekly schedule, sprints, and annual seasonal plan. We will talk about each of them separately. For those who did not see the previous videos on a horse lifespan and career stages, it is advisable to watch these 3 videos. They are published on my website page, equestrian-insider.com/life-and-career-stages-sport-horse. All 3 videos are listed on that webpage. And here is a reminder for career stages of a sport horse with a total lifespan of 30 years. By the end of this video, you will understand training plan elements following the structural approach, map your current training in the training plan terms, and see opportunities in your current training plan. The foundational element of a training plan is needed activity volume in a lifespan of a sport horse. It is a little bit too mathematical subject. I wanted to come to it at the very end of this presentation, but it just didn't work out like that. You see, other elements map to the activity volume, so I had to start with sort of boring numbers and charts. But bear with me, things will become increasingly more practical and familiar to you as we go through the training plan elements, okay? Let's look at the daily activity volume, which we measure in steps, and run some basic calculations. The daily activity volume in number of steps we consider for horses of 4 types based on their training theme, based on their discipline. It's a horse which is a generalist and is exposed to all possible workloads, and specialized horses in dressage, jumper, eventing, and endurance. So if we take a number of steps per day for an okay fitness in lower levels of these themes or disciplines, then we come to some very rounded numbers of between 12 to 15,000 steps per day for a generalist horse, 10,000 for a dressage horse, 17,500 for a jumper, 20,000 steps for eventer, and more than 20,000 steps for endurance, depending on where the endurance horse is on its long distance running stamina. So one training session mounted is typically up to 60 minutes, correct? 1 minute equals 120 steps on average. Now, how do we measure steps? Steps are measured as haunches steps. So hind legs steps, as if horse would rear and we would count only hind legs for steps. Left hind moves 1 step, right hind moves another step. Both left and right hind moved, that equals 2 steps. So 1 minute produces 120 steps on average. This is a very average number. But we take a very average number for simplicity to help understand this concept. So 120 steps per minute times 60 minutes means that during training session, a horse produces 7,200 steps. Well, days vary in activity intensity even for a dressage horse. No activity volume day. Yeah, there are those days. It's a stall or paddock confinement. During such no activity volume day, during confinement day, the horse produces about 250 steps. If it's a low activity volume day, for example, some time in the stall, plus larger turnout with some play for 4 hours, but mostly standing, the horse produces about 1,000 steps, 1,000 steps. Moderate activity volume day, stall, turnout, and light training produce somewhere between 400 and 1,200, between 4,000 and 12,000 steps. High activity volume day, stall, turnout, and intense training produce somewhere between 11,000 and 25,000 steps for a dressage horse. So even though on very, very average, a dressage horse produces 7,200 steps during the training session, days in the week are all different with different activity volumes. So in our calculations for how much activity our horse gets that week or the week before or 2 weeks before, and what volume of activity we plan for the horse for the week after, and 2 weeks forward into the future and 3 weeks forward into the future, we measure in no activity, low activity, moderate activity, and high activity volume days. This is natural. That's how the life goes. But on average, if we average our week, the average good, okay fitness for your horse performing at lower levels is between 12,000 to 15,000 for a generalist horse, 10,000 for a dressage horse, 17.5 thousand for a jumper, 20,000 for eventer, and more than 20,000 for endurance horse. Training mounted is not happening every day of the week. So that contributes to the fact that some days are no activity days or low activity days. Endurance training and runs are much longer distances with more steps per day. That's why for endurance we put 20,000 plus, and it really depends on where the horse is on its endurance long distance running scale. This is an interesting chart. I don't know if somebody ever tried to map activity, average daily activity for low volume, moderate volume, high volume across entire horse's lifespan. Okay, so what we see here? We see a chart which has on horizontal axis horse's age in years. and we look at a horse with a lifespan of 30 years. On the top, we see the career stages of a horse. 1 year it's a foal, and then young and old remount, and then developing horse, and then schoolmaster finishing and schoolmaster maintained, and then 10 years of retirement. The colorful bars mean how many days of activity, assuming on the vertical axis we have 365 days per year, how many days of a certain activity the horse has this year. Very dark blue, it's a no activity day, stall or paddock confinement. How many days in a year of no activity, of confinement we have. Blue, how many low activity days we have. Yellow, how many moderate activity days we have. And red, how many high activity days a year we have. What we see looking at this chart is that a horse is being born with quite some days of no activity or low activity in the first year. And then this begins dropping to a second year of a horse's life. And number of moderate activity days in terms of number of steps per day jumps up almost exponentially. And then peaks on a third year of life, when the horse is full 2 years old, between 24 and 36 months old. That is the time when the horse gets through careful approaches, not too high intensity but a lot of activity volume. It gains its growth and it gains its stamina. It gains its first initial capacity that we then begin using in producing from a domesticated horse a sport horse. The next year, and this is a year of, I believe, first year of old Raymond, we begin taking risks in training. We begin pushing the horse a little bit, and the next year even a little bit more. We're trying to keep the no activity and low activity days, the number of those days, at the same steady volume, but we redistribute some moderate activity days into high activity days. That's why the red bar on year 4 is growing and the yellow is shrinking, but the blue bars stay consistent. We sustain pretty much the same pattern on year 5, when the horse is full 5 years old, on its 6th year of training, and then really from horse's 7th year of life, we start taking more risks. And so high activity days per year dominate. We have more of those rather than moderate and low. Pretty much the amount of high activity days equals the sum of moderate, low, and no activity days. This period of developing horse is period when berators, riders take a lot of risk, because in order to develop the horse, we take the horse out of the comfort zone, sometimes quite far. Then we bring the horse back to comfort zone. And by doing these pulses, we expand horse's comfort zone and we build stamina and abilities, almost at the same intensity. Training happens for a schoolmaster in the finishing stage, which goes from the 10th to 15th year of a horse's lifespan. Assuming that the horse didn't have any breaks, any delays in its previous life. If there were changes, if there were delays, then this chart would have interruptions in its pattern. But we are talking right now about a horse that was born, became successfully a young horse, was put on the saddle, and went on into developing stage, and then turned into a schoolmaster, and went through a very good training in professional hands, and developed to its full potential at the FEI levels. Once the horse is a schoolmaster, and this is interesting, the horse performs at the same FEI levels, but the distribution of the activity volume per intensity changes. We have, again, just like in the Remont years, we have more moderate activity days and we have less high activity days where the horse is pushed with some risk taking. As the horse shifts to retirement decade, between 20 and 30 years old, the days of risk are even less, and we see more days of low or no activity days. This is a very high preservation mode. So the horse performs, it still sustains high activity volumes, but we begin being very careful about what the horse is being exposed to, giving it a lot of time to rest as needed. The last 5 years of a retired horse, I would say not even 5, but 7, 8 years, we already drop the high risk days, and we just use, just like for a young Remont horse on year 1 and 2, we proceed only with no activity, low activity, and some moderate activity days in a year. So no competing at FEI levels 23, 24, 25, 26, etc. year old. There are still some occasional competitions might be possible for a horse in early 20s. On occasion, not a full season, and the same relates to practice at home. But when the horse is coming to 24, 25, we really change the mix into much more gentle. The green line shows average daily activity that year in number of steps. So this is average. This is how we push the horse to work, to be active, not necessarily on the saddle. It includes turnout, it includes play with the bodies in the pasture, it includes hand walk on a walker, on a hot walker, it includes walking and trotting with people, with a groom or stable worker in hand. It includes your grazing time with the horse on a halter. It's all together. And then we see how this works. This chart shows a number of steps per year with breakdown by activity intensity. The previous chart talked about days, and here we just took a year, aggregated all steps, and we wanted to see what it looks like. So if we take a sport horse with a 30-year lifespan, then this is the distribution of yellow zone. This is moderate activity, and red zone is high intensity activity. What that tells us that a horse produces about 6 million steps on a high intensity year. And this is end of developing horse and early schoolmaster finishing years. That's where this volume is the highest. This chart converts high intensity and average intensity days in a lifespan to training hours. On the left axis, we see the number of steps. On the right axis, we see training hours, activity hours per day. So for average training hours, which is a green line, we work more than 2 hours with a horse per day. For high intensity, we're supposed to work with a horse almost 3.5 hours. Could be more. It is hard to invest unless you are a dedicated professional or somebody who can manage his or her own time in the day to be that invested. And this is a reason why assuring activity volume for a horse in a sport barn without human involvement becomes so very crucial. Part of this concept will be also discussed later in the follow-up video about training facilities and how to organize horse's day in the equestrian facility. But here we will continue talking about the structural elements of a sport horse training plan. Activity deprivation in the modern barns, in the modern equestrian centers, is epidemic. 10,000 steps per day is what we need for an okay fitness for a low-level dressage horse. 20-25,000 steps are needed at peak dressage performance years. 60 minutes training session equals 7,200 steps. And if it is a shorter session, which is what many veterinarians and trainers advise, produces even less steps. Most training sessions happen for 30-40 minutes and they happen out of the stall. The horse is being taken out of the stall, led to a covered or outdoor arena. Rider girl hops on, 30-40 minutes of activity, and the horse is being brought back to the stall. Small 30 by 40 feet turnout for 4 hours does not add much more than 200 steps, 250 steps. It's been measured by video cameras. A phone has been attached to a source single, so we could see a number of steps. It's really small turnout, small paddock, 4 hours, does not add much more than these steps, and 250. Even large 1 acre or 2 acres turnouts for 8 hours do not add enough steps. Riders are also mindful that training mounted wears out horse's body, back, limbs, mind. So we're trying not to spend too many hours mounted. This awareness of horse body wear drives riders to have less saddle time. As a result, sport horses are typically movement deprived by about 40-50% of what they need to stay healthy without vets treating training-induced injuries on a well-suitable horse with a balanced mix of workloads. So that is a sad summary. Sport horses are typically movement deprived by about 40-50% of what they need to stay healthy. This chart demonstrates performance demands and weighted average daily activity. So required versus actual. The green line is normalized average training hours per day. The red line is normalized high activity training hours per day. This is what's needed. Dark blue bars demonstrate the activity volume our horses receive in the modern training stables. With the light blue line, the actual average training hours per day. So the green line is how much we would need to train our horses. On the right hand side we see training hours, and the blue line shows average. So if we take 7 days a week and then the horse was trained 3 days for an hour, then there is an average and it distributes over 7 days. So average is very, very low. Average is under 1 hour per day. This leads to a much shorter productive lifespan of our sport horses. We need this knowledge, we need this understanding, because if we do not have it, if we do not identify the problem, then we do not know what to manage. We do not know what to fix. It's like an extreme sun radiation. If it's there, if it doesn't burn our skin, we have no idea about its influence on our internal organs. Horses are movement deprived in the barns. And by hopping on a horse and riding a horse with a higher intensity, we do not compensate activity deprivation. We just put unnecessary strain. We put our horses at risk for a speedy injury. How can we avoid that? So in this video, we discussed the first out of 6 elements of sport horse training plan, which is needed activity volume in a lifespan of a sport horse across career stages. The homework for you can be pencil down what is exactly daily activity for your horse in the last 2 or 3 years. Assuming you have some good memory, videos, diary, competition records, training records, email exchanges, etc. It does not have to be super accurate, but it will give you an outline of how much activity your horse has been exposed to. A general rule of thumb that horses experience activity deprivation in the modern barns, and it is one of the easy fixes that riders and horse owners can do to mitigate and prevent potential injuries and improve horses' stamina for good performance. In the following videos, we will address workloads in a mix, daily activity stack, weekly schedule, sprints, and annual seasonal plan. See you later. Thank you so much for your time, for your attention. Subscribe to my channel, like the videos, please post your comments and send your stories to equestriancoach@outlook.com.